Hello, friends of Herbie. Welcome to this new episode of the Campfire Talks with Herbie, where we look into the TameFlow approach and the theory of constraints. Just want to remind you that next week there will be no campfires because I will be busy with the TOC ICO, that is the Theory of Constraints International Certification Organization, which is hosting a virtual conference. So that conference will basically be on the whole week, and therefore you will not see me on this channel, but you can join the conference there. So let me now introduce you to our guest. Our guest has a long experience in this field, and I'm very pleased also that the field of TOC is well known to him. Our guest is Rudiger Wolfs from London. Right, Rudiger? Welcome to the show.
Hi. Pleased to be here.
Pleasure.
I've watched a number of these. Always very interesting.
So you're based in London, right?
I'm just north of London, a short commute into town. And I've been here for quite a number of years now, but you can most probably hear from my accent, I'm not British born. I come from South Africa originally.
Yeah, it sounds somewhat like a South African accent. So tell us now a bit about yourself. Who are you, and how did you get into this industry?
So I got a Christmas present many years ago, a ZX81, which older people might be familiar with. It was a computer with 1K of RAM, and used to plug it into your TV, and that's where I started sort of my interest in technology. And then that led on to another thing, which then meant I was interested in computers at school. And then when they installed the upgraded computers there, I asked one of the technicians, so how do you get into this computer business? And he said, well, you got to go and study electronic engineering because those are the guys that build this stuff. And it was simple from that point onwards.
So it was a Christmas gift that left a mark, we can say.
It did certainly leave a mark. And I then went on to study engineering at the University of Cape Town, and some finance after that as well. And then got into software development, actually, as most of my classmates are now. Very few people actually stayed in the electronics or the hardware side of the business. And then that led into, working with business to deliver sort of technology improvements. And that's essentially been my career over the years. And I've done stopovers in startups in the sort of roaring .com period. Some fantastic times there, changed the world with the new .com technologies. And then also in very big enterprise, central government organizations. So I've had an interesting time with this career path that I've been down.
And when did Agile come into the picture? And then, of course, when did TameFlow take over?
So Agile came into the scene in my .com days. So in those days, we had very immature technology. We had immature customers. We were immature ourselves. So things were somewhat chaotic, to say the least. And it was in that environment that I was asked to look at how do we organize ourselves better. And I stumbled across DSDM, Dynamic Systems Development Method, which is one of the sort of agile forerunners. Now, the mistake they made was that it was a closed group, and you had to be part of the club to get access to all the ways of working. and that's where they, I guess,
Indeed, DSDM,
missed
I think.
out.
Sorry, DSDM, I
Yeah,
think, had some very, very good ideas given the times. But as you say, it was almost inaccessible for the common practitioner.
absolutely. And so I think this is where sort of the Scrum way of working, by essentially putting it out there and making it almost open source, it basically grew and grew and grew. And
Yeah, I think
DSDM,
that is a lesson that we might want to take home and consider how we can learn from that difference of DSDM and Scrum on how to reach the market.
mm-hmm. Then my interest in theory of constraints started with a reading of The Goal in the early 2000s. And then a few months after I read the book, I was doing coaching on a development program. And one of my coachees was someone who had worked with Eli Goldratt. And
Wow.
as you do, you find out who your people are that you're working with. Oh, I know about theory of constraints. Oh, interesting. I read the book. And over many years, we became really good friends. And so, of course, I got to learn all about the theory of constraints, and I bought, all the books. And I even went to one of the conferences on supply chain and theory of constraints where I met Ellie and a number of other interesting people in the sort of theory of constraints world. My wife even went to a theory of constraints for education conference, which was, fascinating for her. So I've been around theory of constraints for quite a number of years. And my agile journey essentially took prominence over the theory of constraints way of working, where I was hanging out in the agile discussion groups and email groups, and I basically took a turn to do more and more agile stuff because that's where I found the work. And, I now sort of take on roles working with organizations, specifically around sort of the agile credentials I have, and I just bring the theory of constraints to that sort of in the background, because that is a bit
So it's your
different
secret
from the
sauce,
current
basically.
narrative. Sorry?
It's your secret sauce.
My secret sauce, yes.
Okay.
It's the constraint, really. The improvements other than those at the constraint are a bit of a mirage.
Yeah.
But, again, it's difficult to convey the concept to people who see the world in a particular way, and hence your importance on the mental models.
Exactly. I want to try a little different format this evening, also due to the fact that I didn't completely reply to the answers that Oysten asked me in the last campfire. So we'll do a little break here, and I will try to quickly address the question that Oysten was, and basically he was wondering what are the differences in the way we prioritize work in TameFlow compared to some of the other mainstream approaches. So I will turn on the screen sharing here, and you're still there, so you feel free to comment and come into this short break we're doing. And
Excellent.
then I have to flip the page here. I'm still learning how to juggle all these things. And let's start with the classical element of. Hold on. Now I have the Miro board that froze on my tablet. I think this happens every time I'm trying to start this broadcasting of the board. I don't know if it's a curse that always hits me. So let's see if I get the board up here. And let's see if it's the right one. So I'll just scribble something. Yes, it comes up there. Okay, so it seems I am all set for this. I love Miro, but sometimes on this tablet it's giving problems. So the first method is like the classical one that you learn in business school. Now check the ROI, and what you simply do. And I know we have Daniel here on the line, and he's an accountant, so he will immediately correct me if I say something wrong. You look at the sales, and then you subtract like the costs, and ROI is simply sales minus cost over cost. The cost might include the work you do in development, but it could also include other things like the marketing. Notice that here we have no time dimension, even though it might be implied in the cost, because of course if something takes 2 weeks rather than 8 weeks, you're going to pay less to get that work done. But there is no explicit handling of time, and I think this is one of the key factors that in TOC and TameFlow, because we're looking at the system as a physical system that evolves over time, we try to develop that notion that we need to have something that caters for time. And we already have something like that in Reinertsen's work, where he looks at basically the sales of what you're producing, so the economic value, and then at the cycle time. Oh, Rudiger, I'm using that word cycle time. You know, I hate it. I prefer to call it flow time. But since we're referring to this way of working, let's call it cycle time for the moment being. And there, basically, you try to figure out now how fast is the generation of that money through the system. How much would it engage this system from end to end? And basically, this is like the cost of delay. I think that the most wonderful thing of cost of delay is that it has been called cost of delay, so it naturally attracts the attention of the cost accountants that might be listening to your explanation. So it's just brilliant. Call something cost and the accountants will listen to you. We have to learn that as well. But anyway, let's see what we're doing in TameFlow. We always start with these sales, and then we subtract the totally variable costs or expenses, and what is left is what we call the throughput, the financial throughput. And then we still take into consideration like the end-to-end time, so the flow time, but in particular we want to find the flow time on Herbie. So how much time is employed on Herbie by this work, and there we want to figure out what is the speed of generation of this throughput. And of course this gives us the throughput rate, which is the throughput over the flow time on Herbie. So this is like the essence of how we try to prioritize work. We look at this throughput rate, but it's not everything, because as we have mentioned now in a couple of episodes, we have the full kitting moment, where the idea is that we have our canonical work time diagram, where we draw the cumulative flow diagrams in Kanban, and we have a target amount of work, which is the move. That's the epic, the work package, that collection of user stories that we want to realize. And then we also look at the flow time, but specifically the flow time of Herbie, because we want to get to the throughput rate. This way of establishing the value is what we ask the engineering side to do. And notice that the move is estimated preferably via probabilistic forecasting. So you don't waste engineering time in trying to figure out, how long would this take. We use the techniques of Dan Vacanti and which also Julia Wester showed us the other day, to use probabilistic forecasting to get to a forecast. But the big difference is that then we have this other diagram, which is the yen, euro, and dollar, so money. And we want to see, given the time that we have established through that forecasting exercise, so we bring that time over, and remember, it's always the time on Herbie. What is the value that we want to produce? And therefore, we can arrive at the throughput rate. So if we put together these two things, the move from the time forecast and the value that we use to derive the throughput rate, well, we have a move and we have a throughput rate. We do this for all moves that we have on our portfolio board, and the one with the highest throughput rate is the first one, and so on and so forth. So this is how we establish prioritization and selection in TameFlow. The big difference compared to Agile, Safe, Kanban is that we insist that the business side gives us an estimate of value. The business can very much keep the engineering side accountable to provide an estimate of the flow time, and now with probabilistic forecasting it's easy. We get better results and we don't need to waste a lot of time. But as the business side is holding engineering accountable for this, the engineering, when we adopt TameFlow, the engineering side is entitled to keep the business side accountable to provide a monetary value of the work they want to do. Usually this never happens. And that is the great differentiator between TameFlow and all other approaches in this space, except of course TOC, because we learn these things from TOC. But in the Agile space, no one is doing this. Okay, so that's the I hope I didn't take too much time, but that's what I wanted to say, and what I had I owed as a reply to Oystein. What are your comments about this, Rudiger?
I remember several years back, Chris Matz and Tony Grant shared some of their experiences about how they had used their theory of constraints thinking around scheduling work at Skype, where they were working at the time. And I was particularly intrigued by what they had done. So I look forward to getting my head around this. And to do that, I need to actually work through a number of examples in a spreadsheet for myself to make this, intuitive. And I really like the way you have set it out.
So just an anecdote here. I'm very familiar with Chris's work up there at Skype. And I and Wolfram Muller, the co-author of the Hyperbook, we invited him and a few others to start having like a think tank around theory of constraints and Agile. And I even set up a group on LinkedIn for this. And that group I named Friends of Herbie. So it's with that configuration of Chris Matz, Wolfram, and others
Yes.
that I came up with this idea of let's use this moniker of Friends of Herbie, and it's coming back now in these campfires. So I always say hello, Friends of
Wow.
Herbie, but it comes from that that episode. I don't know if Chris is listening. If he is, no, maybe you can comment as well. But anyway, glad that you have this impression. Um, let's maybe okay. I'll take out the screen share, and maybe let's continue to discover a bit more about yourself. I mean, you obviously are a professional in this field, and you've been around for a long time, and you know TOC. You're making a living here on this field. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that. But also, I'm very interested in how will TameFlow affect your making a living in this industry.
So, I mean, here in the UK, which is really where I've been most of my professional life, I've been doing so either working in startups as really as an employee, and then subsequent to that, really working in large organizations as a freelancer or as a sort of consultant contractor role, usually delivering in quite a stressful environment. That tends to be where the freelancers and contractors get called in for their skills. And I've been doing that for quite a number of years. I did go permanent, if there's a really exciting opportunity. I worked for a brand marketing organization, and they had a swimming pool in their basement, so I decided to become an employee there. I quite enjoy a bit of exercise, and they owned Speedo, the bathing suit company, and so of course they needed to have a swimming pool in their basements to get all the people to try it all with their gear.
Absolutely essential. I understand that.
But so in the last few years, again, as I sort of alluded to earlier on, my TOC interest has waned in the sense that the environments I've been have been very much what shall we call them, the traditional agile way of working. So
it's amusing we can talk about traditional when we
refer been around
to agile.
A long time. Again, it was very interesting listening to some of David Anderson's talks many years ago. Again, him and I were hanging out in the same sort of email groups in those early days, where the sort of Scrum community was giving him the cold shoulder, and all this talk about Kanban was, not getting a fair hearing. In his opinion, so he basically went off and started Kanban method on his own steam. So there are lots of people in the agile community. While we talk about adapting and inspecting and adapting and improving, there seems to be quite a hardcore element which is quite religious, and if you're not following their particular version of the Bible, of the Agile Bible, then you are a heretic and need to be burnt at the stake. I tend to be a bit more pragmatic, and my game plan is to come in and empower the team and the organization to do something valuable and have a good time doing it.
Well, that's absolutely the right attitude, I think. And yes, I recognize that the agile word has been how can we say the original intent of the Agile Manifesto has been distorted with these tribal movements, which, as you say, become almost fundamentalist. Let's see who we have here. So let's greet some of the people here, and guess what? Who's first? It's always Daniel. Hi from Montreal. I can't even open the broadcast and Daniel is there. Hi Daniel. And then we have Doug. Doug from cloudy Atlanta. Hi, Doug. We have Mark from Copenhagen. Hi, Mark. We have Mikael from Germany. Hi, Mikael. And for the first time, we have Chris Ajus from Malta. We just had an exercise today with Chris where these topics of the prioritization on throughput rates were at the center. So glad to have you here, Chris. And what else? Okay, then we have some other comments with Daniel. We'll catch up with those later. So welcome all in the audience, and if you just joined, you might contribute your comments in the comment box on YouTube, and I will see them here, and you can interact with us. Okay, so well, now give us a typical day in your life.
So at the moment, I don't have any active assignments, so I can maybe contrast that to what it would look like when I'm working. So, I mean, right now, I'm spending a lot of time, obviously, reading TameFlow and all the sorts of interesting stuff that's going on at the moment, because right now I'm flooded with all sorts of videos and webinars and stuff to read, as everyone around the world seems to be kind of stuck indoors, wondering what to do with themselves. So they're getting into the publishing business. So I would, get up, take the dog for a walk, spend a couple of hours reading and studying. At midday, I usually go for a run in the forest where I live. I've got a lovely big forest with lots of old mature trees. Do about 6 kilometers run, have a bit of lunch, and then back to studying and reading for a couple more hours, and then my family duties of cooking the meal, looking after the kids, taking the dog for a walk, and spending time with the family take over. And that's pretty much what I'm doing at the moment. I've got lots of little pet projects that I've been wanting to work on for ages. I've got a new computer, setting that up. I want to really get to grips with some of the scripting that I've been doing over the years. Python is a useful tool to automate all sorts of metrics and reporting, and integrating with various sources of data for being able to do analyses of what's going on in teams. So
and
I can always
somehow I know you have the ambition of using that to model TameFlow things.
Well, I found it extremely useful. Again, the types of big organizations I've been in have pretty much been using JIRA, the Atlassian suite, for thousands of users. And I can't take the standard reports and do with them what I need to. And so basically I resort to extracting the information, running them through my scripts, and then producing the relevant charts that I need to work with my teams. So that kind of works for me. I can't go to an organization with thousands of people and tell them that we need to install something to get the whole thing to work. That won't fly.
In the corporate enterprise environment is very, how can we say, fossilized in its tools and habits, and it always takes a lot of effort to introduce new things. So what makes you happy at the end of the day?
Well, I'm really, learning lots. I love the studies at universities. I love learning new things. So that's an ongoing part of this type of career, because obviously things are always changing. There's always new stuff. That's one of the exciting things about this line of business. And then, of course, many of the people we work with are also learning new stuff. So how do you grow and support them? And in the kind of roles that I do, it's like the game you play, or I play at least, is how can I have a maximum impact through other people? Right. So that involves changing their perceptions of the world, changing their perceptions of the situation, change a stressful situation into a challenging situation. And again, that all comes through changing the way you view the world and what is happening to you and your approach to it.
So in this career of yours, what are some key insights or wisdom that you, or skills that you might have developed?
Well, knowing about technology helps you to relate and empathize with the people in the teams. Actually being able to understand what goes on inside of people and what makes them tick is really, really important. And also, an insight you get from that is very often the responses and reactions you get, especially negative responses. Of course, you wouldn't object too much if people loved and hugged you for, doing good stuff. But when you get, an earful by someone over something that you apparently did or didn't do, not internalizing that in a negative way is important. And again, these comes from the insights I mentioned earlier on. I met the Skullrat consultant on this course that I did many, many years ago, the self-development course. And that was really instrumental in helping me to see that the mechanisms that run the show behind the scenes in people very often are, automatic. And you just happen to be the target to that response. So in that way, you essentially say, right, do what you need to do, let it out, and then, so how can we actually move forward from this and find a way to jointly come to some kind of way forward?
Would you say that this is one of the greatest challenges you have found while trying to improve companies around the world? And then where do you see TameFlow in addressing these challenges?
Well, again, so TameFlow, of course, has got the toolkit of TOC embedded in it. So, being able to have a common goal and being able to then work through the conflicts is extremely helpful. And, you can then genuinely work together with people who appear to be difficult, but they just have a particular view of what the way to achieve the goal is. And there may be other options. And if you can have a constructive dialogue with them and work out what the assumptions are that underpin that particular view of the world, then you can start to have conversations around, well, what if this and what if that? And maybe if this assumption can be shown to be flawed or inconclusive or, not valid, then we can most probably work out some way to get you what you want and also get other people to help and support you in being able to get that. So those kind of skills become very important when you're working with multiple teams or, working with a team. And, not to take life too seriously, when things are all falling down. How can you make the best of that situation?
Let's talk about rewards. What have you taken out of this career and industry, or what would you still like to receive?
Well, it's really the comments by people in the teams to me about how, let's say, calming the water, the sort of the waves and the storm, and being able to do what is most important to move things forward has helped. And then, of course, you can have conversations with individuals about how you have provided them with new perspectives on what they're doing and how they could do things differently. It's often those relationships that you build up, which are the enduring ones. I go back, I think back to teams that I worked with, a particular team I think of in 2006 where we were asked to come and do an agile pilot. And the relationships you build up are, enduring decades after the event has happened, because you all went through the fire in extremely challenging circumstances and we're all learning new ways of working. And that kind of relationship is then something you can enjoy for years and decades to come.
And speaking of new ways of working or interacting, we have this TameFlow community. And what you expect from this community, and what would you like to contribute?
Well, the great thing about the community, again, from one of the things that drew me to the Agile community was very much there's a willingness to share and to be open on what you are learning. If I think back to the early days in London, lots of meetups, although that was before the age of meetups, those kind of short seminar, webinar opportunities like we are having now provide extremely valuable forums to get insights and to build relationships with people that you bump into on your journey. And you can then basically learn from the community and adapt your view of the world. And, that's how we all improve and get better. So from a community point of view, being able to have discussions and learn together, it's really the fundamental point of the community.
I think that the learning through the community is really valuable also because it creates these great friendly relationships and many things can develop out of that. But I also like to remind the audience at this point that the community is not the only way to learn about TameFlow. Of course, we have the book, the Tame Your Workflow book, and you can always get it at a discount on the TameFlow.com website at Get Your Workflow book, separated with dashes. And also learning might happen through the official trainings, which are headed by Daniel Dwarong. He designs all the training courses, and you would find the list of trainers and courses at tameflow.com/tameflow-training. So if people want to reach out to you through the community or in other ways, where do they find you?
Well, you can send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can ping me on Twitter. I'm just in the process of setting up a little website, rnwolf.net. And then I've got the same handle in the TameFlow community site is at rnwolf. Nicholas is my middle name, and that rnwolf is, stuck with me.
It explains the
for
end.
a very, very long time.
Okay, so to all in the audience, please interact with Rudiger, especially on the community, but also get in touch with him through all of his web presence and channels. Now, soon I will ask you to ask me a question, but let's see what we have coming in from the comment stream. We have Daniel, who was commenting on Chris Mutz used the TOC to plan the PI capacity. Yes, it was more about capacity planning rather than date forecasting. We have some interesting comments from Doug. Dan Vacanti has raised a concern that the value from the business is also a distribution and not a single value. How do you include that in TameFlow? Well, first of all, yes, I would agree that even the value is a distribution. You cannot forecast that you will have exactly that number down to the cent as future sales. It's in the future, so the best thing you can do is to estimate. But let's also keep in mind that we are asking the business side to provide an estimate, and it's already hard to get them to accept a distribution for the time. That's why, by the way, we focus on the average time, and then we have the buffer. We know it is a range, so we're taking care of the distribution. But with the business side, we can reason in terms of one number, which is the average, with all the caveats of the flaws of the averages. So even though this is formally correct, I think it would be overkill to ask the business to provide a probability distribution of value, even though it would formally be more theoretically be more correct. Let's at least start to get them to express value in some numeric form rather than being very abstract. If we can get the business to be accountable, then interesting conversations will follow, and those are more important than the actual precision or accuracy of estimates, whether they are the time or the value. So the way we are doing this move time, flow time estimation and throughput rate estimation is really construed to create conversations between engineering and business, and in those conversations problems will be addressed. Doug has another interesting comment. When Monte Carlo simulations are applied to cost of delay with both value and duration, so that's Dan Vacanti, postulates that if you size your work to your cycle time, then the best outcome comes from prioritizing the shortest move first. Of course, because if you size your work to the cycle time, you're basically boxing in the scope and the time, and then of course it's just a triangle. If you make the shortest move first, the slope of the base becomes shorter, so the slope goes up. That is correct. I do not quite agree that you would want to size your work according to the cycle time, and I'm not sure if I understand that comment entirely correctly. Mikael, JIRA has an API that you don't need to install anything. You can get the data onto your local host nowadays. I'm not sure what this was referring to. Maybe when you were talking about getting data from JIRA.
Yeah, so you can use an Excel plugin, or you can use Python locally to speak to the API, usually out there on some cloud server. But then once you've got the data locally, you need to slice and dice it into a format that gives you the information that you need to make the decisions.
Okay, and we have a latecomer. Anna Sikorska says hello. Hello, Anna. Welcome to the show as well. Okay, so now over to you, Rudiger. What would you like to ask me?
So you've been involved in using TameFlow in numerous organizations, and there must be some very interesting war stories which you have got to share with us. We're around the campfire now. What do? We've got our marshmallows, and we want to hear some of the stories,
to get
some of the
beer.
scars on your back.
Yes, I mean, there are quite a few episodes that I can relate to. And of course, TameFlow developed over a long period of time. So there are maybe episodes which, if I were in that situation today, I would address in a different manner. But I like to, in answering this, because we have this book, the latest book with Daniel, Tame Your Workflow, where clearly we are reuniting Kanban and TOC. That clearly gives the impression that TameFlow is about Kanban and TOC, but I always like to remind that TameFlow has a long story that originates with patterns and pattern theory, and the four flows like were shaped as I was tinkering about with patterns. So, for instance, take the psychological flow. There was one episode where there was one team, a small team, that had been constituted very at that moment when I came to this company in a larger, much larger company, where the whole TameFlow thing was going on. But this team was like a configuration of individuals that just could not bear one another. You know, it was like every meeting, after 30 seconds, they were arguing and shouting. So it was a very, very dysfunctional team. Now, all extremely skilled engineers. You know, any one of them individually would be a top scorer on any like engineering job interview or experience report or so. But together, they just could not become a team. So what did I do there? Well, I resorted to the core protocols. So trying to get them to start to respect one another, trying to get them to know one another. So having them like tell their personal life stories and their personal situation at that moment. Of course, they did so very reluctantly. I know I had to almost twist their arms, but slowly they started to open up. And as is the case when people tell stories, the others start to listen. And this went on for several weeks, and we enforced the core protocols in every single meeting, and eventually they were like applying the core protocols by themselves. I did no longer have to facilitate them, and then they started to be a real team. So that is like one facet of TameFlow that you would not infer from the current book, which is all about pest environments in product portfolio situations. And the other one, I think I've recounted the story before, but one of the main cases where I used patterns, agile patterns, was this huge corporation in the Netherlands, where they had grown by acquisitions, and they had brought in some, I don't remember the numbers, but it was in the order of 20, 30 business units, all developing software. And the cost accounting logic set in, so the mandate was we must consolidate. We must use a common shared platform and common shared methods and processes, and that was to be realized with an agile transformation. The only problem was that all the country managers and product owners of these business units were of course in fear of being on the losing end of the stick, because the idea that had become like widespread was that the company would pick one of these units and make that the lead, and the others would have to give up and just adapt to that best of breed unit. Of course, it could never work. They were just fighting all the time. So that's when I brought them in a couple of weeks. So with it was actually spread over a month, but there were two weeks in the same room, all these people. And I said, no, forget about what you're doing. Just start from scratch. And I forced them to do pair story authoring. They spent one whole week just brain dumping what they had learned from their own experience, but pairing the authoring of the stories with someone else who was like in the enemy camp. So by doing this exercise, and of course pairing and then quick rotation, so every 5 minutes I enforced the rotation of the pairs. So they changed the pair very, very frequently, and at the end everyone had been exposed to the ideas of everyone else, and they had developed that shared understanding. Yes, we share an understanding, but no one of our products is delivering that. So then, okay, why don't you subscribe to the vision and start developing that product that does not exist and that you all agree is better than what you have? And that like unblocked the situation. So using these patterns of creating a collective intelligence where the moment of enlightened self-interest comes about, and people just move on from there.
That sounds very interesting. It's again, you've most probably heard the concept of skills liquidity, or again, making sure that essentially the team, in one sense, audits the skills and the capabilities they need to do their work, and then has a look at what level of skills they've got, and then works out a way to transfer those skills where they are in short supply. And there'll, I suppose, be various working agreements that you can use to make sure that happens.
Yes, I mean the skills liquidity concept is very, very valuable when you try to see how a group of people can compensate for one another's weaknesses in a way, and even learn from one another. But here, keep in mind, it was not one team. These were high-level execs, like country managers, business unit managers, and also product owners from completely separate companies, and they just had to agree on doing something together. So it was a very different situation than what you have in a normal like agile transformation, where presumably you are facing an organization that has grown organically. They started small and then they become a medium-sized company, then a large one. This one was already a multinational to start with, that decided, it was in the publishing industry, and decided that we need to go digital, so we don't have any digital capacity. They were basically cutting trees and printing ink on paper, and therefore the way to quickly become a digital information provider was simply through acquisitions. So they bought these 20 odd companies throughout Europe. So we also had the language issues and the local regulatory issues, and they wanted to have like one consolidated thing. And I remember that I said to the European CIO, I think it was, that, well, you had a brilliant idea to buy all these companies, but it is as if you one morning get out of bed and you have the brilliant idea, oh, we need to get into some sports, and it has to be a sport with a ball, or with a round ball. So you start buying a football team, you start buying golf players, basketball players, ping pong, and all of them, and then you tell them, you must play the same game. So it doesn't quite work like that, because that's what you're doing. So that's when, with that exercise, we got them to realize that, the ball, so software, digital, is a great concept, but what we have is not good for us. We need to make something new. So play with that vision, get them to develop the vision collaboratively together, and by having these clashes of idea, the pair story authoring, which, by the way, was always such that if I and you were pairing, I was proposing the idea, and then you were writing it, and then we rotated. So I took over the writing part of the story that I proposed, but someone else came in the pair and would continue. So I would explain briefly what this was about, read through what I had written, what the other guy had written, and then the new one that comes in would continue my narrative. So it was very, very like a sort of improv exercise where you finish a sentence halfway and someone else has to conclude it, but it was in envisioning one story. And then I had to leave that story and someone else came in onto it. So it was like a chain reaction of partial views that was shaping that story. And while that was happening on one, between one pair, the same was happening between another dozen of pairs.
So everyone gets to contribute to the story in some way.
Yes. So they gained ownership of every single story that was on the table. But okay, these are episodes which just give you a sense that TameFlow is not only Kanban and TOC. We have even all these other techniques, and well, the right word for me is patterns, because all these things were designed or invented in terms of using pattern languages and using the generative powers of patterns. So you recognize a context, you see a problem, you apply a solution, and you have a new context, and you try to steer that towards something that you are aiming for. You don't know where you're going, but you sort of steer and
well,
you know,
those patterns, of course, are going to be something that I look forward to, obviously gaining familiarity with and expanding my knowledge of, so that when I come across those situations, I've at least got a starting point.
Yeah,
and
unfortunately,
again, you speak about the community. Again, those patterns are things that you can essentially learn to use without having necessarily been through the same pain.
It is something that I need to write about, because I have this the pattern TameFlow patterns book, which I started writing in 2016, but which actually was the chapter, the what is currently there is derived from the chapters on patterns that was in the 2013 self-published Tame the workflow book.
Yes.
Which then was taken out because the cost accounting department of the JIRA publisher that took over that manuscript and made it into a real paper book said, we can only chop so many trees for this cost, so you have to take something out. And I took out the patterns chapter, and that became like the introduction to the pattern book. But I still have to write. That was only the
introduction. I had a quick look before this. I see it's like single digits percentage complete.
It's still at the beginning. No, I still have everything back here. I have to brain dump it somehow. Let's see what we get on the comment side. We have Sri from Roaster. Hello, welcome back. We have a good comment here from Mark. Steve, interesting with patterns for psychological flow. So do you have a proto pattern or even Alexandria pattern for agile transformation, creating trust across functional silos? Well, you don't reason in terms of one pattern, because patterns work together. They are making like the pattern language which you can use to describe a situation. So any situation is never described by one pattern. It's described by a set of patterns where you like express these sentences in this pattern language, and at every new node you add to this network, you can you can see different ramifications. So it can extend in different directions. That's why patterns are so extremely flexible. That's why TameFlow has been so incredibly adaptable, surviving Scrum, going through Kanban, absorbing TOC, the core protocols. So I would never try to identify one pattern for agile transformation, but you might have a pattern language for agile transformation starting from, let's say, a Scrum company. But if you're starting from a Kanban company, the pattern language that you would use would be different because the context is different. So
Yeah, I think context is really king.
yeah,
Different organizations, different teams are in different places, and you really need to be able to
Mark
do
is
what's
giving
best.
a good advice there to look at the patterns book. But yes, no, by all means, but be warned, it's still a very, very early draft, and it's probably just a few percent of what it can
But it will
become
be.
if I have time. If I have time to to write about that. So again, Mark, context: big company, problem, lack of trust, lack of collaboration to satisfy customer needs, solution unknown. Well, it's a very, very common situation, so nothing new under the sun there, Mark. I would say if you have access to the top brass, make them appreciate throughput accounting, because that is like the secret sauce to make all of this work.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, just to add something to that, I have worked in big companies where it has been fantastic. So, so there are war stories in one sense, which are good ones, like it can be done. And
Yeah.
I think when you have a community of people who talk about the good stuff they've done, just one of the things I just was thinking of when you were talking about, my TOC experience. I met a chap called Ray Immerman at the TOC conference I went to. And he shared a talk about how he worked with an organization, First Solar, which was almost going bankrupt. I don't know if you've seen that case study. Absolutely incredible how he basically worked with the entire organization from top to bottom to help them focus on their constraining goal at that point in time. And that company grew into a multi-million dollar company. So when you see stories like that, they inspire you to do the best you can in your situation. While it may seem hopeless, there are some great stories that you can draw on for inspiration and hope.
Definitely, and Mark is giving us another little tidbit here. It's just the context, safe chosen. So I say, okay, the situation is almost desperate, but we will try to fix that anyway. I always say, go back to the basics of Dr. Goldratt's teaching. What does a company need to achieve? The company needs to achieve to make money today and in the future. So the notion of growth and stability, it needs to grow because that's the natural state of an organism. So it's an organic collection of people, a social body of people that interact and communicate and make decisions. But it still needs stability. It wants to be there in the future. And yes, Mark goes on, top to bottom slice. Absolutely, that's the best way to start with TameFlow. I think it's different.
I think for almost any job, you need to have access to the top. It really helps.
Yes, but it's a different thing to have access and to have like sponsorship and approval, which often is, yes, guys, you have my approval, go ahead, do it. That's how most of these things happen. and you really need that approval to make any impact in the organization. But with the TameFlow approach, the involvement of top management is active. So, for instance, when we have that conversation in the full kitting phase, and we explain that we need the vertical slice. Why? Because we want to create a new nervous system. When a signal comes from the bottom to the top must respond. They are kept accountable for responding. So you force, so to say, a social agreement, a social contract between the people involved, where you set the expectations. So, dear CEO, I'm not satisfied with your approval. I want your commitment. And that changes the game. Often they won't give you the commitment. So, okay, sorry, I cannot help you. It's you are withholding a necessary condition for this to work. And then maybe you show them the goal tree or a CRT, a current reality tree, and you explain why they are needed. So if they want to have a responsive organization because the market conditions are changing, they have to be responsive. They have to give the example. So,
well, if they want to be agile, they need to respond. So especially if they are mandating agility in the organization, it works both ways.
But I think mandating agility is almost like a fashion thing.
One of the anti-patterns. Well,
it's a common context.
Yes.
But it's fashionable, and if your company is challenged and you see everyone is doing agile, so I'm not doing agile, so maybe that's why. So let's do agile. So it becomes this copycat mechanism. But I like to go back to the basics. Now it's a business situation, so you want to be responsible to the market. By the way, time has been flying.
Yeah, I just noticed we are over time here.
We are indeed. So let's just see at one last comment, then we will wrap up. So Mika, lack of trust is part of a bigger problem and often not a root cause. How about evaporating clouds? Of course, if you start looking at the bigger picture and you start depicting the picture with all the armory that TOC gives us with current reality trees and finding the UDEs, the root causes, that's where you expose the conflicts, and then the evaporating cloud is one of the most powerful tools you have to resolve conflict. But this presumes, and this is important, that all people involved are sharing that same common goal. So that's why we always try to start with a goal tree, because unless there is that common goal, the conflicts will, in my opinion, will not be evaporated. It's a necessary condition to have that common goal. So I think we are way over time. It means we've had lots of fun. So Rudiger, any closing remarks, comments on what we've been going through here?
Well, thanks for your, I suppose, your time and dedication to building up the community. Having the sort of campfire chats has reinvigorated my enthusiasm in this way to work. You kind of are aware of these approaches, like you said, I've been exposed to the TOC way of viewing the world for quite some time. But you get caught up in the bandwagon of, right, all the Scrum stuff, all the Kanban stuff. But then when you have articulated things so nicely in your book, you realize, yeah, actually, you're right. I've actually lost the plot a bit here. And so getting back to basics in one sense with the support of the community. And I'm very interested to see how things develop.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned a few times, had it not been for Daniel Dwaron,
Yes.
all this, well, first the writing of the book, and then this idea of quote quote commercializing TameFlow would never have happened, because for me, TameFlow was always my own secret sauce as a one man
Yes.
gang. I was always extremely successful on the field. I have very few how can I say challenge situations. So it was my secret weapon. But Daniel convinced me, we need to make something out of this. The industry is missing one of the greatest possible contributions, and well, glad that Daniel
Yes. Well, thanks to
convinced me.
Daniel for that. I thought
Yes,
I'd lost you to the blockchain.
yeah,
The blockchain world.
drag me back from that world. Well, I'm still very much involved with the blockchain. So yes,
Yes.
it's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. One morning it's blockchain, the next evening it's Campfire. So, we
Great.
have one last comment from Mark, which I think is a good conclusion. Thank you, Rudiger, Steve, and friends of Herbie. Yes, we are all the friends of Herbie here. And remember, there is no dishonor in being Herbie. You might be Herbie, and we are always helping Herbie, no matter who or where he is. So, friends of Herbie, that's it for this evening. And I also want to remind you, there's no Campfire next week because we have the TOC conference, but the week after, probably we will take up the broadcast again. So thank you,
Great.
and till
Thank
next
you.
one. Bye.